Eran Tal. Eran is one of my co-supervisors for my thesis and a great mentor. He's associate professor here at McGill in the Department of Philosophy and Canada Research Chair for Data Ethics. Eran's work has made landmark contributions to the philosophy of measurement. He works in the philosophy of science more broadly, the philosophy of measurements, and now ethics and big data and artificial intelligence. And today he's going to talk to us about responsible measurements. So I'm very much looking forward.
I'm having the time of my life. This is just the best group of people I can imagine to share ideas about these topics. So first of all, the title of the talk is a little shorter than advertised because I realized that I wanted to say a lot about measurement, but I also wanted to say a lot about the ethics of machine learning in mental health care, and I just had to pick one. So I picked measurement, but if you want to talk about ethics of machine learning, I'm very enthusiastic. So catch me in the break or at the dinner. Another thing I want to say is this is very much work in progress. And in fact, this is very much in the spirit of philosophers who don't have to worry about people dying. We just kind of throw crazy ideas into the air and see where they land. So here goes, responsible measurement and use mental health care. Yeah, so the key question kind of in the back of all of this is what does it mean for young people to be engaged in mental health data collection and use? So in this group, it's very kind of, it's easy that in the sense that I don't have to start explaining why we need youth engagement in mental health practice. Everyone's on board. And most of you will also probably agree that youth should be specifically engaged in not just mental health practice, but also specifically in data collection and use practices. And we already heard from Joe and Sky about how this works. But now I want to get more specific about the details. Well, what exactly does it mean to engage, for youth to engage in mental health data collection and practice? And how deeply are youth supposed to be engaging? And this is closely related to another question, which is, why is it ethically legitimate for youth to engage in mental health data use and practice, data collection and use practices? What is the source of ethical legitimacy of youth engagement in mental health data practices? And notice that these two questions, question about depth of engagement and the question about the ethical legitimacy of the question of engagement, are really tied together, right? How deeply youth should engage in data collection and use practices should at least partially depend on the extent to which it's the source of the legitimacy of this engagement. And a third question that's closely related is, well, what are some of the barriers that are kind of preventing youth from engaging deeply as they are ethically legitimate to engage with data collection practices and data use practices? And to make this more concrete, before I make it more concrete, these questions fall under the broad umbrella of data ethics, as I understand data ethics. I understand it to be the study of the ethical dimensions of data collection, use, and governance in scientific research, in healthcare, and policy, and in a few other areas besides, like engineering, commerce. So it's a very, very broad field. And it's not just big data. When we talk about data ethics, it's not just big data, although it includes big data. But many of the questions that I think a lot of the kind of the hype around AI ethics is like, this has never happened before. Well, actually, it has happened before. Many of the ethical worries about big data today are variants of ethical worries about measurement that have been with us at least since the mid-19th century. And it's enough to read Ian Hacking and Ted Porter to realize just how familiar they are. More specifically, if we look at measurement in psychology, a lot of the ethical concerns rightly focus on topics like privacy and consent, bias and unfairness, misinterpretation and misuse of test scores, we heard today from Dan about stigma and discrimination. But in this talk, I want to go into a less well-charted territory, which has to do with patient autonomy and their choices, their power, as Joe so eloquently talked about, in deciding what gets measured and how it's used. So think of yourself as a young person entering an integrated youth service center and being presented with the PHQ-9, which is a 9-item patient health questionnaire. It measures depression. These are the first 5 items. So you're being asked, over the past 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by, for example, trouble falling asleep or feeling tired or poor appetite? And the question I want to ask you for a moment is, what has been decided for you at that moment? Simply by being handed this questionnaire, what kind of things have been decided for you that you didn't choose? Here's one. Whether or not depression can and should be measured has been decided for you. Right? You didn't choose that. Here's another thing you didn't choose. You didn't choose how depression is conceptualized, right? Whether it's a matter of function or a matter of symptoms, a matter of responsiveness to certain kind of treatment, and if so, which kind of treatment, whether it's a matter of your attitudes and experiences. The questionnaire has decided that for you. It also decided what the content is. So which symptoms, which attitudes, which experiences, which should be part of the questionnaire. And well, obviously it decided which instruments to use, because here's the one you've been given, how data are represented, whether it's numerical, whether it's qualitative, whether it's interval or ratio scale, all that has been decided, how items are awarded, the testing and administration method, whether it's, for example, static like this one or adaptive testing, how scores are calculated, how they're aggregated, how items are weighted. And these are just a handful of the things that have been decided for you in this, just in terms of data collection in this moment. Now, those of you who have bought into the idea that, mental health care system design should be co-created, should kind of intuitively agree that yes, in the co-created youth-centered health service, young people and their service providers should participate in making these choices, right? And to add to the list, that's just data collection. But what about data interpretation and data use? So many choices that have been chosen for you. Which scores count as better or worse? How scores are referenced, so norm referencing versus criterion. Which thresholds say count as moderate or severe depression, and how to use them in determining clinical significance. What does it mean for a score to change over time? Which decisions are informed by the data? Are you going to use this for screening, for diagnosis, for tracking my progress? Are you just going to use the data when making decisions, or are you also going to incorporate clinical judgment? Are you also going to incorporate the patient experiences? And looking even further, are you going to run algorithms on this data? And if so, how are they going to be designed? What's going to be, what labels are you going to use in the data and so on? So again, in a co-created youth-centered health service, young people and their service providers should participate in making these choices. Okay, so far I've been preaching to the choir, I think. But here comes the twist, which is, imagine for a moment that we have this kind of dream where youth do make all these choices, right? We don't expect a 16-year-old indigenous person in northern BC to be making the same choices as, say, a 23-year-old francophone transgender person in Quebec City. Right? So it's very clear, I think, very quickly becomes clear that measurement is going to look very, very different if we start truly empowering the data collection practice choices and data use practice choices, empowering youth to make those choices. And this is my main thesis, that taking patient engagement seriously, especially in youth mental health, means more than just redistributing power. It's not just, okay, I'm going to take some power from the psychometricians and give it to the youth and I'm done. No, it's what you're doing, if you're doing that, and I think you should be doing that, is really revolutionary. Right? You're changing what measurement and data are. If you're doing that, if you're radically changing the balance of power in data collection and use, you have to fundamentally rethink what measurement and data are, and what the role of all these institutions that we have around data and measurement are. What are their functions? And specifically, I think you should adopt what I call responsible measurement, a very different view of measurement than what we're used to in mental health care, which is to measure responsibly is to understand mental health measurement as social technology. And I'll explain what social technology is, but the idea very, very broadly is that measurement is a means of shaping society and individuals' place in it. That's what measurement is for. It's not for collecting data. Data happens. Data is kind of a byproduct of measurement, but measurement is an intervention in society. It's a way of changing society and the place of individuals in it. And this conception legitimizes young people to challenge mental health data practices in a deep way, and I'll explain what I mean by deep later on. Okay, so I'll start by talking about the barriers first, and then in the second part, I'll talk about responsible measurement. So what are barriers to youth engagement in data collection practices and data use practices in mental health? Well, this all goes back to the same project that Sky already mentioned, mobilizing measurement into care. This is how I got into this space and thinking about these topics in 2019. I began to collaborate with Sky Barbic, who, as I mentioned, is the lead scientist, the head scientist of Foundry, a network of integrated youth service centers in British Columbia. Me and my team of philosophers of science from McGill worked with her to try to tackle the fact that there's a kind of a disconnect between measurement as it's performed and the functions that measurement should be doing in order to promote youth mental health in this context. Well-established measures are kind of dropped from above. The researchers have already left the building. Here's the questionnaire, and now these clinicians have to use them in order to measure. But what they measure is something different than what the clients and the clinicians care about very often. Okay, so the first step, Sky and I thought, was to communicate better with the clinicians and to try to get clinicians to understand measurement rather differently than how they currently do. And we created an entire training and a guidebook to help youth mental health clinicians to make the most out of patient-reported measurement. This was our team. I'm about to say that 4 of us are right here in this room. And we just had a wonderful team and came up with a 2-day training, 11 videos, and the kind of the jewel of this project is a guidebook called Mobilizing Measurement into Care, and it has 11 chapters. It's very non-technical and specific to integrated youth services. This is not the final cover, by the way. It covers things like a general introduction to health outcome measures, but also topics that are not usually discussed, especially not with clinicians. For example, what's the ethics of measurement? Right? What are ethical issues with measurement in your interaction with clients? What purposes does measurement serve in mental health? How do you select the right measure for a given purpose? How do you interpret scores? How do you integrate measurement into your practice day to day? So this guidebook, we've used it several times in pilot trainings, and I'm glad to say that it's supposed to, in 2024, it will actually be a book that you can hold in your hands and buy on Amazon. But we don't think that we completely solved the problem. I mean, training clinicians in understanding measurement in a kind of collaborative, co-creative way is one thing, but no matter how much you train clinicians, if clinicians are only a small part of the problem, you're not going to solve the whole problem. The problem is much more systemic, and many of the barriers remain. So some of the barriers have to do with the fact that, like I mentioned, instruments are already fixed and standardized before the therapy even starts. The pool of instruments that your organization is working with is already pre-selected. Instruments aren't designed with or for young people, as Sky mentioned. The clinical pathways and thresholds used in your organization are usually already set as well. And as Joe mentioned, there's a power imbalance that's always there. And it's partially due to differences in authority, differences in age, differences in education, sometimes differences in culture. That they're all barriers for youth to challenge. And it takes so much for a young person who's already in a state of distress to ask, why is this question being asked of me? Or why is that other question not being asked? Or this questionnaire does not represent. These are not the concerns I came here for. Imagine just what a huge step a young person has to take in order to challenge that when they're already there for an acute pressing problem. And I think there's something deeper there. Measurement, as it's conceived today in healthcare, is still viewed as a one-way information extraction. You're the subject, we're going to kind of extract information from you. A young person is still a passive subject, even in the age where the FDA requires you to use prompts everywhere. A prompt is still very much a constrained kind of communication. Here's the question. Here are all the assumptions that I listed on these previous slides. They're already fixed for you. And here are the response options. You only have 4. Only 4 options. So you tell me if you've had trouble with sleep every day, sometimes, or never. That's not really a genuine conversation. We'll mention Leah McClymans, who's been shouting this off rooftops for years now, later on. But I want to briefly mention learning health systems, because I'm on the bandwagon in as far as I think something like a learning health system is part of the answer. But I want to be cautious here because, as I mentioned also in my question to Sky, there's this idea that's common in the learning health system literature that learning health systems only work if they have comparable data based on common metrics. I guess this is the 3rd time you've seen this circle in various versions, right? This idea that well, how do we know that our health service has an impact? It's only because we can compare it to other health services, and we can only compare it if we all use the CASLO 10 or the PHQ-9, and then we can compare. But hold on, isn't the whole point of learning health system to learn? And isn't part of what they're learning is the values of clients and their families? And if so, aren't part of these values supposed to affect not just the practice of care, but also the practice of data collection and data use? So it seems like data collection practices should be free to evolve and should be free to become hyper-personalized to a service, to a region, to an age range, to a culture or language or specific disorders or concerns. But then you lose something that to many people, at least in this literature, is kind of the bread and butter of learning health systems, which is standardization. So this doesn't mean that we shouldn't adopt them. I think there is a lot of potential, but I think we have to be cautious. The details really matter. Learning health systems can be an engine or a barrier to youth engagement in data practice, depending on the details of how it's implemented and how it's designed. And there are people here in the audience that know much more about this literature than I do, so I'm happy to learn what you think. Okay, but now let's try to go to what I think of as the abstract level of the solution. Because I really think that to tackle this kind of problem, we have to shift not just our practice, but also our thinking about what measurement is. There are really two main approaches today to measurement in the social and behavioral sciences, which I call knowledge first. That's first you measure, then use the results to pursue your goal, right? So you wanna, are you too hot? Measure the temperature, then figure out what you want the temperature to be. Right, so the temperature measurement gives you knowledge, and then you use it for some purpose. And those are separate, right? The temperature in this room has nothing to do with how hot or cold you want to feel, right? Those your goals and the actual temperature are just these separate, distinct things. Then there's the values first, which goes the other way. That says, okay, first decide what you care about, what you want to learn, and then design a measurement practice that promotes those values. And I'm going to say that in mental health measurement, either approach is actually too rigid. That neither knowledge first nor values first by itself gives you what you want if you want measurement to achieve your goals and evolve. What you need is some kind of a combination between those. So let's have a quick, before I talk about the combination, let's have a closer look so you can have a better idea of what knowledge first and values first are. Here are a couple of examples. And the example, I want you to think of these examples once I show them to you with this question in mind. How deep do ethical and social values go in shaping measurement? Let's look at the PHQ-9. The PHQ-9 is what's called in the psychometric literature a reflective measure. You assume that depression is a construct that's latent, and that the responses on the questionnaire are manifestations that are somehow in some loose way caused by the state or the value of the depression, the state of depression. This is a knowledge first attitude. We want to extract knowledge about the person's state, and we're doing it through the responses to these questions. Then, if you look to areas like development economics, you see quite the opposite way of thinking. That's values first. An example is a Human Development Index. It's very widely used by the UN and other bodies to track the state of human development in different countries. So here you take data about the life expectancy at birth in a given country. You take the expected years of schooling in that country. You take the GNI per capita, so the income per capita in that country, and then you sum or average them out, and you get a number. And that number is the Human Development Index. Now, no one really thinks that there's kind of this latent variable that is the human development of that country that's being kind of extracted. Rather, the question is, what do we care about when we care about human development? So the indicators and the relative weights are decided directly by what you value, by what the UN values. But here's a question. Is there something kind of essentially different about depression and human development that kind of necessitates measuring one reflectively and measuring the other formatively. It's called formative measurement. So, for example, is there something wrong about thinking that depression, the very construct of depression, is shaped by the values of patients and their families? That we should shape the concept of depression based on what we care about when we measure it? I don't think so. And on the flip side, is it that wrong to think that, well, there is something about that is the human development of a country that's there? Notice that when we do that, we realize that no, these are actually quite kind of historically situated disciplinary differences between health and economics that are not really warranted by the subject matter. I'm running a bit behind on time, so I'm going to skip some parts. But what I want you to notice is that values don't need to enter into your measurement process in the way that your discipline tells you to. Messick identified that, the famous psychometrician who worked in educational measurement, when he said, well, there are value implications everywhere when you interpret the test scores and when you derive actions from your interpreted scores. And there are social consequences when you act on things like math ability or reading ability tests. Part of validating a test for Messick was making value judgments. In fact, he said validity judgments are just value judgments. So am I saying something more radical than Messick? The answer is yes, I am. Because for Messick, yes, measurement is value laden, but it's still knowledge first. Social consequences, yes, they're important. They provide evidence about whether you might be measuring something you didn't mean to. But in the end, all these values shouldn't loop back and change what the construct itself. So for example, if it turns out that I measure everyone's math ability, and it turns out there's a gender bias, sorry, a gender difference. There's a gender difference. So one group does significantly worse in math than others. Is this a reason to think that I'm measuring math ability wrong? Messick would say, well, I'm not so sure. Right? It could be that I'm measuring it right, but for some reason there's a gender difference. And I'm not going to read that quote, but that's basically what he's saying. But what if we think about measurement as a social technology? What if we think about measurement as a way to change society? This is taken from Ted Porter, who says, the highest purpose of numbers is to instill an ethic. They provide standards against which people judge themselves. Well, there's a cynical way of understanding this. Measurement becomes this kind of social engineering, totalitarian type of tool, and I believe it can. But measurement can also be seen as a kind of applied science, a way of realizing values such as equity, such as autonomy, and of course, like health. So if we think about measurement seriously as a social technology, it should be evaluated primarily by its coherence with human practice and the contribution to the goals of the social project. Foundry or YHU are social projects. They're meant to promote some things, and measurement is simply one of the many tools through which it realizes its values. But that means that youth are allowed to radically change what depression means, what anxiety means, what distress means, if that serves their values and the values of the organization. We don't need to stick with knowledge first measurement. This is Leah McClymonds from the University of South Carolina, who has a forthcoming book called Patient-Centered Measurement. And there she says,
look, patient involvement is a negotiation regarding values. And that's what that's how we should think about it. This very much coheres with Joe's talk. And notice that this is a stronger claim than simply saying, hey, measurement is value laden. Yes, it's value laden, but guess what? It's also a practice of changing society, of negotiating values. This is where I come in with the concept of responsible measurement. In responsible measurement, all these different parts of measurement, data collection, data use, data governance, are part of a process of iterative co-stabilization of knowledge and values. So knowledge is simply part of what measurement produces, but it's not the end goal. Measurement is viewed as a social technology, a way of intervening on society, and youth engagement in measurement is a means of shaping society and shaping the place of young people. For example, fighting discrimination could be a goal of measurement. And I want to, just before I finish, give you a kind of a taste of how knowledge first, I'm putting value first aside because it's not really used very much in healthcare, but knowledge first measurement versus responsible measurement. So you can see the difference. In knowledge first measurement, the aim of measurement is to produce knowledge. In responsible measurement, the aim of measurement is to achieve some social good. Health, equity, autonomy, even efficiency, economic efficiency. In knowledge first measurement, reliable data are the end product of successful measurement. Why do we measure? To get reliable data. Well, hold on, responsible measurement says, no, our end product is a kind of society. Okay? What we want to do with measurement is create a kind of society. In knowledge first measurement, when you intervene on the subject or in society with your instrument, that's a byproduct. We didn't mean that. Oh, sorry, you felt alienated or hopeful when you read this questionnaire. Forget about it. We just meant to know how what your depression level is. Forget about and everything that measurement did, the experience of being measured did to you. Of course, that's completely opposite. Data and responsive measurement, sorry, I'm still here. Data and responsive measurement are byproducts of measurement. So it's the data that's the byproduct. The intervention is the center. The content of a construct in knowledge first measurement is independent of the ethical and social consequences of measuring. It's just out there. Reading ability, depression, there's just fixed content to that. But in responsible measurement, the content of a construct is shaped by the ethical and social consequences of measuring it and the values of those who are being measured. Values and social consequences in knowledge first measurement inform score interpretation, but they don't determine if your measurement is successful. Whereas in responsible measurement, values and social consequences just co-evolve with the knowledge. So values and knowledge are in this ongoing negotiation, and success or failure is the result of that process. Finally, patient engagement in measurement practice under the knowledge first conception is ethically legitimate unless it undermines knowledge. So once you start to undermine knowledge, you can take a step back and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, now I need to look at my evidence. That's too much values. But here responsible measurement says, no, look, patient's values are constitutive of knowledge. The thing we want to learn about is not some kind of abstract, detached the property you have. We're not measuring, it's not like measuring temperature. It's much more like riding a bike, or actually creating a bike, constructing a bike. It's a negotiation of values. And we want to know what a stable and desirable state of society would be like. That's the target of our knowledge. So deep patient engagement is ethically legitimate. Finally, what I wanted to tell you today, and sorry for running over time, is that if you want ethical legitimacy for radical, deep youth engagement in mental health data practices, great. But
you also need to commit to a corresponding radical reconfiguration of the concepts of data and measurement. And these things go together. Responsible measurement, as I've tried to elaborate on it today, is an intervention on individuals and societies. And youth engagement in measurement is ultimately a means of shaping society and youth's place in it. Of course, you can say, well, I don't want radical shifts. That's too much. I don't want to fire all the psychometricians. And that's fine. But without this radical shift, don't expect health systems to learn in this kind of free evolving way that you want them, right? As long as we don't have this radical shift, the ability of learning health systems to learn will be limited ultimately by the rigidity of your measurement practice. And if you want to know, well, how do I make this change? How do I make this radical change? Well, Sebastian's going to tell you. Thank you.
Questions? Yeah, absolutely. Also, three, right?
Okay, great.
Thanks so much for that. I think I saw Ian put his hand up first.
Thanks, Eran, for a wonderful, absolutely wonderful talk. So let me ask you about a presupposition of this argument. Presupposition seems to be a particular view about mental health and well-being. So let me put it in the form of a thought experiment. So something not very likely, but conceptually possible. So I get up tomorrow morning and there on the cover of Nature is a revolution. We have a pill for youth mental health, youth depression. And it turns out you have to ask them 3 questions, and the answers to the 3 questions tell you how many milligrams of the pill to give them, and they're cured. Now, I take it that it wouldn't be a good outcome of such a view. So first of all, the question is it your view that that's not possible? That thought experiment? Okay. So I take it, assuming it's possible, it wouldn't be a good consequence of your view that to the extent that we can measure in this way and cure in that way, to the same extent we inhibit autonomy, right? We wouldn't want that to be a consequence. We'd like to be able to say, if that were to happen, we'd have to find a way to preserve autonomy in other ways, because otherwise, I mean, it seems intuitively unappealing to think you can either cure or preserve autonomy, you can't have both.
Yeah, well, my response to that is, I'm not claiming that measuring that mental health systems should forever evolve and never be at a resting place. It could very well be, although it's hard to imagine right now, that at some point in the future, we'll find this kind of wonderful interlocking where our knowledge, in this case the pill, and our values, in that case suffering, avoiding suffering, and promoting autonomy, will kind of interlock beautifully. No one will have any objection, right? My view doesn't rule that remote possibility out. We would still need to iteratively check that this pill is still, still aligns with what people want from it, and that we're not, for example, abusing this pill to treat, or to overdiagnose, or to, there are various ways that this pill, even if it's great for something, could be used terribly wrong for something else, right? So the role of values is still going on, but there is no kind of presupposition that we should be fundamentally anti-realists about depression or anything else. It's just the trajectory, the method of responsible measurement should be adopted rather than just kind of a knowledge first. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much for the talk. So I'm wondering if you could say something about what responsible measurement would look like in practice. So like when I'm thinking about knowledge first, nice example, like if we're operating under that sort of paradigm, then like I get questionnaires that I have to answer that were decided for me. So what does the alternative look like? So are we still getting questionnaires? It's just that patients have had a greater role to play in like formulating and developing the questionnaires, or is it like an entirely new sort of practice?
So very briefly, yes, there are still questionnaire, perhaps. It's not an anti-questionnaire movement. But
There will be no question marks in your future.
oh, will there? But the full answer, you're looking at this guy. Ethical iterations is the answer to that question of how it's going to be done. So just wait for another hour.
Cool.
I don't think you, yeah, go ahead.
So as I was listening to your talk, it kind of, what I was taking from it was almost this kind of greasing of the wheel of like hacking looping times.
Yeah.
Where it's like, instead of there being a tension between how the biomedical establishment defines things and how people with lived experience define things, we're gonna kind of flip to be on the same side and roll that wheel faster and faster.
Yeah.
How does that then square with your answer that there could be an end?
So first of all, Ian Hacking was one of my supervisors, my doctoral supervisors, so it's not a coincidence.
Okay. That's a good
And
point.
yes, that's very much inspired by that kind of, I'm kind of merging Ian Hacking's looping with Asok Chang's epistemic iterations, which you also Sebastian will talk about. But Ian, if you read that chapter in the social construction of what about looping and interactive kinds, Hacking doesn't rule out the possibility that there will be some kind of stability at some point, that this looping will stabilize. As far as, at least the way I read it.
It's been a long time since I've read it, so I can't.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, I'm happy to talk more about this.
Yeah.
We have one more minute.
Thank you very much for the very thought-provoking presentation. So I'm just wondering, because youth is a very heterogeneous group of people, and I'm wondering, as far as applying responsible measurement goes, what are some of the key things to think about when looking at the youth as a heterogeneous group, even in terms of age, the various age ranges and also the group dynamics. For example, with the recent protest about the gender identity, LGBTQ, right? There's also this kind of tension between parents, caregivers, and youth. So how do we take this heterogeneous group and the group dynamics into consideration when thinking about applying responsible measurements?
Great, so I have two parts to my answer, and I think neither will completely satisfy you, but the first part is what you're pointing to is something really important, which is, I didn't actually say it in my talk or on the slides, but responsible measurement is deeply political. It's a form of activism, because when you decide to change what depression means to allow I don't know 16-year-olds in Manitoba to live a better life, you're a measurement activist, right? You're undercutting validity as it's been thought about even by people who are relatively radical like Messer. So yes, political movement, protests, they should all be they're all symptoms, if you want, of the kind of society that we want. They should be part of the question of, is our measurement doing the right thing? The second part is that, and this is where I think you'd be kind of less happy, is that I don't know how to actually do the specifics. I'm very much in line with Sky's comment that the kind of thing we're doing is really, really long term. It's going to take possibly even decades to reconfigure healthcare systems to do it right. So in the specifics of which conditions should be measured in which way for which age group, I think anyone knows how to do that yet, in accordance with my vision. but it's gonna be exciting to find out.
Right, I think that's time, so let's join me in thanking.